All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You know how this works. You bring the sources, and we dive deep.
Really get into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. So today we're looking at fashion design.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how to create clothing patterns.
Ah, the blueprint.
Yeah, the blueprint for, going from flat fabric to a garment.
Right, like the instructions, for actually making the clothes.
Exactly. So, imagine you've got a design in your head, but none of the commercial patterns quite cut it.
You want to make something unique.
Yeah, you want to make something completely unique. How do you do that? Well, we've got an awesome source from you guys.
Oh.
Yeah, it's from a German YouTube channel. It's called Werde Designer.
Werde Designer.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it.
Which translates to become a designer.
Okay, so, getting right to it.
Yeah, it's all about making bespoke pieces, getting rid of those generic patterns.
I mean, they have their place.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, if you're just starting out.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can be a really great starting point.
But ultimately, I think, for a lot of people, the goal is to move beyond that.
Yeah, make something that really fits your vision.
And your body,
Yes. And speaking of fitting the body, the video actually talks about the two main ways of pattern creation: draping and flat pattern making.
Yeah, kind of the two big, branches.
Yeah, and draping is all about, actually shaping the fabric directly on a dress form.
Very hands-on.
Yeah. And then flat pattern making is more about, taking measurements and using calculations to create the pattern on paper first.
And then, transferring it to the fabric.
It's a little more, technical. But it's cool. They're not mutually exclusive.
You can kind of go back and forth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could drape something to get the initial shape and then translate that to a flat pattern.
Right.
To really fine-tune the fit.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, going back to what we were saying about commercial patterns, the YouTuber really emphasizes, ditching those.
Like eventually.
Well, eventually, yeah.
Like, understanding the limitations.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're really great starting point, but they're based on standardized measurements.
Right, which never really fits anyone perfectly.
That one size fits all, we all know that that's a myth.
It's a myth. It's a myth. And they talk about bust sizes specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Like, even a slight variation there
To make a huge difference.
can completely change how something fits.
Yeah, like the whole garment.
A whole garment.
Because it kind of throws everything else off.
Yeah, totally.
So
There's this great story, actually, from the YouTube comments. The YouTuber shares a comment from a viewer
okay.
who was looking for pants that fit her measurements.
Okay.
But her measurements, she calls them impossible.
Impossible. What does that even mean?
Like, they're so far outside the norm.
Okay, yeah. So she's having trouble, finding anything.
Finding anything.
That fits.
Yeah. And it really, it just emphasizes that
Yeah, commercial patterns aren't going to cut it.
they're not going to cut it.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating, for a lot of people to try to conform
To
these, standards.
when their body's just not built that way.
Right. And that's where
That's where.
learning, like, the fundamentals
Yeah.
of pattern making can be so powerful.
Yeah. Totally.
Because then, you can make whatever you want.
It's like you're taking control.
You're taking control.
They're saying, like, my body is great.
Right.
And I'm going to make clothes that fit it.
Exactly.
Now, the YouTuber also talks about how different pattern-making systems.
Oh, there are different ones.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so different pattern-making systems are used all over the world.
Makes sense, I guess. Different, like,
Different approaches.
yeah, and I guess, like, body types probably.
Well, that's what they say, is that
Yeah.
even average body types can vary in different places.
Oh, interesting.
And that also cultural preferences have shaped how these systems develop. Oh, okay, so like fashion trends.
Yeah, totally.
Contributing to, like, the way that patterns are made.
Exactly. See,
Interesting.
it's like different languages of pattern making.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like they talk about how Italian systems
Mm-hmm.
tend to prioritize a more fitted silhouette.
Okay.
And that's just, part of their fashion sensibilities.
Right.
And then, French couture, which is known for the detail,
Mm-hmm.
has a different kind of precision.
Yeah, so like, understanding those little differences.
Can really, like, up your game.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, speaking of different systems, the YouTuber is a big fan of German systems.
German.
Okay. They mentioned Miller and Son specifically.
Oh, I've heard of that, yeah.
What's so special about those?
I think German engineering, right? It's all about
Precision.
Like, precision, yeah.
They take into account a wider range of body measurements.
Oh, okay.
So you can get a much more, like, customized fit.
And probably better for those impossible measurements than,
So-
like, if you're outside the normal range.
It's giving you the tools
Yeah.
to create garments that really work for you.
Yeah, so, like, more adaptable, right?
Much more adaptable.
More flexible.
And the skills that you learn are transferable, too.
Oh.
You can use them for, like, menswear,
Mm-hmm.
children's wear,
Oh, wow.
even costumes.
So, like, it's a good foundation
Yeah, really good
to
foundation.
jam build on.
Now, here's the part that blew my mind.
Mm.
They talk about creating dress patterns
Mm-hmm.
by extending a basic bodice block.
So, like, starting with the top.
Yeah, you're essentially
Reel that
taking
down.
a fitted top pattern and just extending it to make a dress.
Okay. That's interesting, yeah.
Such a cool technique.
Yeah, time-saving, I imagine.
Yeah. But, you know,
I mean, I imagine there's more to it
I'm sure there is.
than just, drawing a straight line down.
Right, you have to think about the proportions.
The silhouette.
Yeah, how it's going to drape.
The fullness of the skirt.
Yeah, it's like architecture, but for clothing.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. So, like, you can't just be, like, haphazard about it.
Right.
You got to think about the structure.
I'm already thinking about all the dresses I want to make.
Yeah, the possibilities.
The possibilities. But, okay, before we get too ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
The YouTuber also makes a distinction between patterns for woven and knitted fabrics.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, they use the German terms.
Oh, yeah.
Work and strick.
Warp and strick.
And honestly, I never really considered how the fabric
Could, like, dictate.
could dictate the pattern itself.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
But it makes total sense when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, they behave really differently, those two types of fabric.
Yeah, so woven fabrics like your cottons, your denims,
Your classics, sturdy.
they're very stable.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have much give.
Because of how they're made, right?
Yeah, because the yarns are woven together at right angles.
Yeah, like a basket. Almost.
Yeah, like weaving a basket. So, they have very little stretch.
So you got to factor that in then for the pattern.
Yeah, you have to incorporate ease
Right.
to make sure that the garment allows for movement.
Otherwise, it's going to be, like, too tight
Way too tight.
and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, knit fabrics,
Knit fabrics are different.
totally different.
Stretchy.
Yeah, they're made by looping the yarns together.
Oh, okay, so it's a different...
It's a totally different construction.
Yeah.
So it's like, imagine you're making a chain.
Oh, okay.
Like each loop connects to the next one.
I see. So that gives it, like,
The stretch.
the stretch and the flexibility.
So knit fabrics are going to mold to your body
Yeah.
much more naturally.
So then you don't need as much ease
Exactly.
in the pattern.
In fact, too much ease can make a knit garment
Like baggy.
baggy, shapeless.
From
Nobody wants that.
Right.
So it's all about choosing the right pattern
Right.
for the right fabric
For the right fabric.
so that everything works together.
Yeah, works together harmoniously.
It's so much more than just
Sewing, right?
Yeah, it's like there's all this like
it's a science
yeah.
to making a garment that fits well.
Yeah. I mean, it's art and science, right?
It really is. It really is.
That's fascinating.
And we've only just begun to scratch the surface here, so
More to come.
much more to come in part 2 of this deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. So, we're talking all things pattern making.
Yeah, lot to cover.
Lots to cover. And, we were just talking about how woven and knit fabrics behave so differently.
Right, different construction.
And how that impacts the patterns you use.
Yeah, it's like easy to forget that sometimes.
Right. You just think, oh, fabric, pattern, sew it up.
Yeah, but it can make a big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. So, we were talking about German pattern making system.
Mm-hmm. The precision.
All that precision and adaptability.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of how that actually plays out, like in a real garment? Okay, yeah. So let's say you're working with someone, right, with a really pronounced sway back.
Which is pretty common.
Super common.
Yeah, it's a fitting challenge.
Yeah, and a lot of standard patterns just, don't really account for that.
They just don't.
But German pattern making systems, they actually have specific techniques
Oh, wow.
to address that. So you would take extra measurements.
Like more than just the usual.
Yeah, to really determine the depth and the angle of that sway back.
Okay.
And then you'd use those measurements to make adjustments to the back pattern piece.
So you're not trying to force a standard pattern to fit.
No, you're actually modifying the pattern to fit the body.
I see.
Working with the body, not against it.
It's so smart.
It is. And that's where German systems, really shine.
That makes a lot of sense.
They give you that framework for creating garments that just, fit like a glove.
Regardless of like individual variations.
Yeah, because everyone's different.
Everybody is different.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that these skills, they're transferable.
Right.
to other types of pattern making, like menswear, children's wear.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what are some of the adjustments you'd make if you were designing, for a kid versus an adult?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So when you're designing for kids, you have to remember that they're constantly growing.
Right. They're not just tiny adults.
No, not at all. So you need to adjust the proportions to account for that.
How so?
Well, for example, kids have shorter limbs
Yeah.
proportionally compared to their torso.
Yeah, and their heads are bigger too.
Huge. Yeah, so those differences, they need to be reflected in the pattern.
Interesting.
Otherwise, it's not going to fit right.
So it's not as simple as just like shrinking an adult pattern down.
No, you got to rethink the whole structure of the
Yeah.
garment.
And menswear, I imagine, has its own challenges too.
Totally. I mean, men's bodies tend to be, more angular,
Right.
broader shoulders,
Yeah.
narrower hips.
So the pattern shapes and measurements need to reflect that.
Yeah, you can't just use, a women's pattern and adapt it.
It's fascinating, all this variation
It is.
within the world of pattern making.
And it's always evolving, too.
Oh, I bet.
There's always something new to learn, new techniques.
New challenges.
Yeah, it keeps it interesting.
Speaking of the techniques, let's get back to that tip about creating dress patterns by extending a bodice block.
Oh, yeah, that was cool.
I'd love to hear like a step-by-step breakdown of that process.
Okay, yeah. So, first of all, you need a basic bodice block
Right.
that fits you perfectly.
That's crucial.
Yeah, that's your starting point. And then you decide on the style of skirt you want.
Like A-line, pencil skirt, full.
Exactly. So, do you want something flowy or more fitted? That's going to determine how much width you add to the skirt portion of the pattern.
You're not just adding length then.
No, you're thinking about the whole silhouette, how it's going to drape.
Like how much volume you want?
Mm-hmm. And then you choose how you want to achieve that fullness.
Okay, like gathers.
Gathers, pleats, darts, there are different options.
Each one creates a different look.
Right. And requires different adjustments to the pattern.
Can you walk us through a couple of examples?
Sure. So let's say you want a gathered skirt.
Mm-hmm.
You would slash and spread the bottom portion of the bodice block.
Slash and spread. Okay.
You're basically adding width to create those gathers.
So you're literally cutting the pattern and spreading it apart.
Yeah. To make more fabric for the gathers, and how much you spread it depends on how full you want the skirt to be.
I see.
And then for a pleated skirt, you'd add triangular folds to the pattern.
The pleats.
Yeah. And again, the size and spacing of those pleats determines the look.
Oh, so many options.
It is. And for a darted skirt, you'd add wedge-shaped darts to the pattern.
Right, to shape the fabric to the curves of the body.
Exactly. So each technique has its own way of manipulating the pattern.
To get that desired effect.
Mm-hmm.
This is making me want to go grab some pattern paper and just start playing around.
It's fun.
It sounds fun.
And remember, there's no one right way to do it.
It's all about experimenting.
Yeah, finding what works for you.
So we've covered draping, flat pattern making, different systems, fabrics.
A lot.
What else do we need to think about when we're creating patterns?
Oh, one important thing we haven't mentioned yet is ease.
Ease.
Yeah, ease is the amount of extra room that's built into a pattern.
So it's not just your exact measurement.
No, it's extra to allow for movement and comfort.
Okay, so like wiggle room.
Exactly. And how much ease you add depends on a few things.
What?
Like the type of garment,
Hmm.
the fabric you're using,
Right.
and the fit you want.
Okay, can you give us an example?
Yeah, so, if you're making a fitted blouse out of woven cotton,
Okay.
you might add like an inch of ease at the bust.
Okay.
But if you're making a loose t-shirt out of knit jersey,
Something stretchy.
yeah, you might only need half an inch.
Because the knit fabric already has that strength.
Exactly. And if
Okay.
you're making something with a lot of movement, like a flowy skirt, you might even add more ease.
So it's all about striking that balance.
Yeah, between fit and comfort.
Making sure the garment looks good and feels good to wear.
It's got to do both.
Right. It's amazing how much thought goes into all of this.
It really is. It's kind of like you don't realize until you start digging into it.
It's like a whole hidden world of knowledge.
It goes into making clothes.
Yeah, it's really cool. I feel like I'm learning so much.
Me too. It's great.
This deep dive is awesome.
It is, yeah.
And we've still got more to cover, so
Stay tuned.
stay tuned for part 3. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of pattern making.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It really has, and we've talked about so many different aspects.
Different systems, fabrics, ease.
But before we finish, I want to go back to something we mentioned earlier.
Oh, what's that?
The difference between patterns for woven and knitted fabric.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
The YouTuber talked about work and strick.
Right, those German terms.
And it made me realize I never really thought about how the fabric itself
affects the pattern.
Yeah, like how its structure impacts the design.
It's easy to overlook, you know.
Totally.
Yeah.
So woven fabrics, like our cottons and denims,
Yeah, the sturdy ones.
they have that stable structure, not much stretch.
Because the yarns are interlaced, right?
Right, at right angles, like weaving a basket.
Exactly, so they don't have that natural give.
So you have to factor that into the pattern.
Yeah, you need to add ease for movement.
Otherwise, the garment would be way too tight.
One wearable, practically.
Now, knit fabrics are a whole different story
Totally different. They're stretchy, flexible.
because of how they're made. Those looped yarns.
Yeah, like a chain, remember?
Right.
Each lip connected to the next.
It's such a good visual. So knit fabrics can mold to the body.
Much more easily. So you don't need as much ease.
Right. Too much ease would make the garment saggy.
Lose its shape.
It's all about balance, right?
Finding that sweet spot.
Enough ease for comfort, but not so much that it looks sloppy.
Exactly. Choosing the right pattern for the fabric is key.
Making sure they work together.
Harmony.
It's incredible how much goes into making clothes that fit well.
It's a real art form.
It is. Shout out to all the pattern makers out there.
The unsung heroes of fashion.
I'm so inspired by everything we've learned in this deep dive,
It's been a journey.
and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired too.
To get creative.
Exactly. So as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with a question. Now that you've peeked behind the curtain of professional pattern making, what will you create? What amazing designs will you bring to life?
The possibilities are endless.
That's the beauty of it. So
Yeah.
go forth and sew, everyone. Happy sewing.